For 14 months, no enemy convoy that crossed this sea was ever caught. 72 hours. 8 transports, 4 destroyers, gone.
Major Edward Larner stood in the cockpit of a B-25 Mitchell at Port Moresby, Papua New Guinea, at 06:15 hours on March 3, 1943, watching his armourer load a 500-pound bomb with a 4-second delayed fuse. The fuse mattered. Without it, the bomb would detonate on impact with the water, and the blast would destroy the aircraft dropping it. With it, Larner could fly his bomber at mast height, 50 feet above the waves, and skip the bomb like a stone into the hull of a Japanese transport ship. He had practiced this 18 times over the previous 6 weeks. He had never done it in combat. In 3 hours, he and 13 other B-25 crews would sink 3 transport ships in 11 minutes, using a tactic that did not exist 4 months earlier. The battle that followed would destroy an entire Japanese convoy in 3 days. 8 transports and 4 destroyers lost, more than 3,000 soldiers drowned or killed in the water, and an entire reinforcement operation annihilated before it could reach New Guinea. But that outcome was not inevitable on the morning Larner loaded his aircraft. It was the result of a single miscalculation made 6 days earlier in Rabaul, a new bombing technique developed by a lieutenant colonel who had never attended engineering school, and a weather system that cleared 12 hours earlier than the Japanese meteorologists predicted. The margin was thinner than the histories suggest. 6 days before Larner loaded his bomber, Vice Admiral Gunichi Mikawa sat in his headquarters at Rabaul, New Britain, reviewing the plan for Operation 81. The operation was simple in concept: move 6,912 soldiers of the Japanese 51st Division from Rabaul to Lae, New Guinea, a distance of 450 nautical miles, aboard 8 transport ships escorted by 8 destroyers. The reinforcements were desperately needed. Allied forces were pushing inland from the Papuan coast. Lae was a critical base. Mikawa had delayed the convoy twice in February because of Allied air activity. He could not delay again. The 51st Division had been waiting in Rabaul since January. The decision was not whether to go, but when. Mikawa's staff meteorologist, Lieutenant Tanaka Susumu, predicted a weather front would move across the Bismarck Sea beginning March 1st. Heavy cloud cover, low visibility, squalls. The front would shield the convoy from Allied reconnaissance aircraft for at least 48 hours, possibly 60. That would be enough. The convoy would sail at night, shelter under the weather during the day, and reach Lae before the skies cleared. Mikawa approved the plan. He set the departure for the evening of February 28th. Tanaka's forecast was correct in every detail except one. The weather front cleared on the morning of March 3rd, not the afternoon of March 4th. That 28-hour miscalculation decided everything. The architect of the American response was not a general but a lieutenant colonel named Paul Irvin Gunn. Gunn was 43 years old in March 1943, a former Navy enlisted man and civilian bush pilot who had enlisted in the Army Air Forces after his family was trapped in the Philippines when the war began. He had been trying to kill Japanese ships for a year. The standard method was high-altitude bombing from B-17 flying fortresses at 20,000 feet. It did not work. Gunn had watched B-17 crews drop hundreds of bombs on Japanese vessels in 1942. The hit rate was less than 2%. Ships could see the bombers coming from miles away and maneuver during the 30 seconds it took for a bomb to fall from 4 miles up. Gunn believed the solution was to fly low, not at 20,000 feet, but at 200 feet, or lower. At that altitude, the bombardier's problem became trivial. The ship was right in front of you, the bomb drop was nearly horizontal, and there was no time for evasive maneuvers. The problem was surviving. Flying straight and level at 200 feet, directly toward a warship bristling with anti-aircraft guns, for the 15 seconds required to line up a bomb run, was suicidal. Gunn's answer was to arm the bomber itself. He mounted 8 50-caliber machine guns in the nose of a B-25 Mitchell, 4 on each side, all firing forward. The bomber would strafe the ship's deck during the bomb run, suppressing the anti-aircraft crews. It was not elegant. It worked. The second problem was the bomb. Drop a 500-pound bomb from 200 feet, and it hits the water and explodes on contact. The aircraft, flying at 230 miles per hour, would be directly over the explosion. Gunn's armament officer, Captain Jack Caldwell, proposed a solution borrowed from the British, a 4 to 6 second delayed fuse. The bomb would hit the water, skip forward like a stone. The physics were identical to a child throwing a flat rock across a pond. Strike the ship's hull below the waterline, penetrate, and detonate inside the hull. Caldwell tested the idea in December 1942. It worked on the third attempt. By February 1943, 18 B-25 crews had been trained in what they called skip bombing, or mast-height bombing. On March 3rd, they would use it in combat for the first time, on a scale large enough to matter. The Japanese convoy departed Rabaul at 1800 hours on February 28, 1943. 8 transports, Kyokusei Maru, Ayo Maru, Teiyo Maru, Nojima Maru, Taimei Maru, Shinai Maru, Kembu Maru, and Oigawa Maru. 8 destroyers, Shikinami, Uranami, Shirayuki, Asagumo, Tokitsukaze, Yukikaze, Asashio, and Arashio. Total, 16 ships, carrying 6,912 men. The transports were not fast. Cruising speed, 7 knots. The voyage to Lae would take approximately 60 hours under ideal conditions. Mikawa's plan called for the convoy to round the western tip of New Britain, cross the Bismarck Sea along the northern coast of New Guinea, and arrive at Lae on the morning of March 3rd. The weather held for the first 2 days. The convoy was not spotted. On the morning of March 1st, Major General George Kenney, commander of the U.S. 5th Air Force, knew a convoy was coming. He did not know when or where. Allied coast watchers, Australian scouts positioned on islands throughout the region, had reported increased shipping activity at Rabaul. Japanese radio traffic had increased. Reconnaissance flights over the Bismarck Sea had found nothing, but the weather was terrible. Kenney issued a simple order. Every available reconnaissance aircraft, every day, maximum range, until the convoy is found. He had 207 aircraft available in Papua New Guinea on March 1, 1943. That was not a large number. He would use all of them. The weather broke on the morning of March 3rd. At 08:15 hours, a B-24 Liberator, piloted by Lieutenant James McElhatton, flying a routine reconnaissance sweep 80 miles northeast of Cape Gloucester, spotted the convoy through a gap in the clouds. 16 ships in 4 columns, course southwest, speed approximately 7 knots. McElhatton radioed the sighting to Port Moresby, circled once at 8,000 feet to confirm his count, and turned for home. He had been in visual contact with the convoy for 11 minutes. The Japanese had not fired at him. Either they had not seen him, or they assumed a single reconnaissance aircraft posed no immediate threat. Both assumptions were wrong. By 0900 hours, every Allied bomber in Papua New Guinea and northern Australia was being armed and fueled. Kenney's attack plan had been prepared weeks in advance. Wave 1. B-17 flying fortresses bombing from high altitude to break up the convoy's formation and force the destroyers to maneuver. Wave 2. Skip bombing B-25 Mitchells attacking at mast height to sink the transports. Wave 3. Australian bowfighters strafing lifeboats, rafts, and survivors in the water to prevent any troops from reaching shore. The third wave was controversial. Kenney believed it was militarily necessary. Every Japanese soldier who reached Lae was a soldier his ground forces would have to fight later. His Australian liaison officer, Group Captain William Gehring, objected. Strafing shipwreck survivors violated the laws of war. Kenney overruled him. The order stood. At 1,000 hours on March 3rd, 13 B-17 flying fortresses from the 43rd Bombardment Group took off from Port Moresby. The lead aircraft was piloted by Captain Donald Hall. Altitude, 7,000 feet. Bomb load, 6 500-pound general-purpose bombs per aircraft. Total 78 bombs. Hall's orders were explicit. Attack the transports, not the destroyers. Destroyers could be replaced. Troops could not. The flight to the convoy took 1 hour and 20 minutes. At 11:20 hours, Hall's bombardier, Lieutenant Carl Hustad, spotted the convoy 12 miles ahead. 16 ships in a loose box formation, the transports in the center, the destroyers on the flanks. Hustad marked the lead transport, Kyokusei Maru, as his target. Hall began his bombing run. The first bomb fell at 11:24 hours. It missed Kyokusei Maru by 60 feet, detonating in the water to port. The second bomb hit the stern, destroying the steering gear, but not sinking her. The third bomb missed. The fourth bomb, dropped by Lieutenant William Thompson's aircraft, hit Kyokusei Maru amidships, penetrating to the engine room. She began to list. Within 8 minutes, all 13 B-17s had dropped their bombs. 3 transports were hit: Kyokusei Maru, Teiyo Maru, and Nojima Maru. None had sunk yet, but all 3 were burning and slowing. The destroyers laid smoke and began evasive maneuvers. The formation, which had been tight, was now scattered across 2 miles of ocean. Kenney's plan was working. At 11:45 hours, 13 B-25 Mitchells from the 3rd Attack Group, led by Major Edward Larner, arrived over the convoy at 200 feet. This was the moment Larner had trained for. He selected Kyokusei Maru, already damaged and smoking, as his target. His co-pilot, Lieutenant Raymond Wilkins, armed the 8 forward-firing 50-caliber machine guns. Larner's bombardier, Lieutenant Thomas Howe, armed a single 500-pound bomb with a 4-second delayed fuse. Larner pushed the throttles forward. Airspeed, 240 miles per hour. Altitude, exactly 50 feet, measured by Wilkins with a handheld altimeter, because the aircraft's instruments were not accurate below 100 feet. At 1,200 yards, Larner opened fire. The 8 machine guns fired 800 rounds per minute each, a combined rate of 6,400 rounds per minute. Tracers every 5th round. From the deck of Kyokusei Maru, it looked like a red line connecting the bomber's nose to the ship. Larner's target was not the hull, but the superstructure, the bridge, the deck-mounted anti-aircraft guns, and the gun crews. He held the trigger for 12 seconds. His co-pilot, Wilkins, later estimated they fired 1,280 rounds in that pass. At 400 yards, Larner released the bomb. At 200 yards, he pulled up and banked right, climbing to avoid the ship's mast. The bomb hit the water 50 feet short of Kyokusei Maru, skipped once, and struck the hull 6 feet below the waterline, just forward of the midship's cargo hold. The delayed fuse worked. The bomb penetrated the hull, traveled 8 feet into the hold, and detonated among 400 soldiers of the Japanese 51st Division, packed into the space with their equipment. The explosion opened a hole in the hull 20 feet across. Kyokusei Maru began to sink immediately. Larner did not see this. He was already climbing away, his aircraft at 500 feet, turning back toward Port Moresby. Behind him, 12 more B-25s began their runs. In 11 minutes, the B-25s sank 3 transports: Kyokusei Maru, Teiyo Maru, and Nojima Maru. 4 more transports were hit, but remained afloat: Shinai Maru, Ayo Maru, Taimei Maru, and Kembu Maru. 1 destroyer, Shirayuki, was hit by a skip bomb that detonated in the forward magazine. She sank in 4 minutes. The surviving destroyers maneuvered desperately, laying smoke and firing every anti-aircraft gun. They shot down 1 B-25, piloted by Lieutenant Jack Hawkins. Hawkins and his crew of 6 were killed. It was the only American aircraft lost in the attack. By 1200 hours, the battle was over. The bombers turned for home. The convoy, or what remained of it, was scattered, burning, and sinking. Rear Admiral Masatomi Kimura, commander of the convoy's destroyer escort, faced a decision. 4 transports were sinking or already sunk. 4 more were damaged. None could make 7 knots. May was still 120 miles away, at least 20 hours at the reduced speed. The weather was clear. The Americans would return. Kimura ordered the 4 damaged transports to proceed toward Lae at best speed, escorted by 4 destroyers. The other 4 destroyers would remain behind to rescue survivors from the sinking ships. It was the only decision that made sense. It was also a death sentence for the remaining transports. At 0730 hours on March 4th, the same 13 B-25s that had attacked the day before, now led by Captain Larner, he had been promoted overnight, found the 4 surviving transports 40 miles northeast of Leh. Shinai Maru, Ayo Maru, Taime Maru, and Kembu Maru, escorted by destroyers Shikinami, Uranami, Asagumo, and Yukikaze. The transports were in a line, 500 yards apart, course southwest, speed 5 knots. Larner radioed back to Port Moresby. 4 transports, 4 destroyers, sitting ducks. He attacked immediately. Shinai Maru was hit first, by Larner's wingman, Lieutenant Alan Boyd. Boyd's skip bomb hit the starboard side amidships. The explosion ruptured the fuel bunker. Fire spread across the deck within seconds. Ayomaru was hit second, by Captain Donald Dahl. His bomb struck the bow, detonating in the forward hold. The bow broke off. Ayomaru sank in 6 minutes. Taime Maru and Kembu Maru were both hit in the same pass, by Lieutenants Robert Rooks and Thomas Forsyth. Both transports were sinking by 0800 hours. In 30 minutes, all 4 remaining transports were gone. The destroyers rescued what survivors they could and retreated toward Rabaul at flank speed. The final phase began at 1100 hours on March 4th. 12 Australian Beaufighters and 6 American P-38 Lightnings, under the command of Squadron Leader John Jackson, Royal Australian Air Force, arrived over the area where the transports had sunk. The water was thick with debris, life rafts, wooden planks, floating cargo, and men. Hundreds of men. Japanese soldiers clinging to wreckage, swimming toward shore, or drifting in life jackets. Jackson's orders were to strafe them. He later wrote in his report, "It was not a mission any of us wanted. It was not war as we understood it. But the orders were clear." The strafing lasted 1 hour and 40 minutes. The aircraft made repeated passes at 100 feet, firing their 50 caliber machine guns and 20mm cannons into the water. Jackson reported that many of the Japanese soldiers waved white cloths or raised their hands. It made no difference. The orders allowed no discretion. One pilot, Flight Lieutenant Kenneth Grant, refused to fire on his 3rd pass. He later faced a reprimand but was not court-martialed. The official Allied estimate, prepared after the war, concluded that approximately 2,900 Japanese soldiers were killed in the water on March 3rd and 4th, some by drowning, most by strafing. By the evening of March 4th, 1943, the Battle of the Bismarck Sea was over. Of the 8 transports that departed Rabaul on February 28th, 8 were sunk. Of the 6,912 soldiers aboard, 2,900 were killed, and 2,427 were rescued by Japanese destroyers and returned to Rabaul. Approximately 1,585 reached the shore of New Guinea, mostly near Cape Gloucester. Of those, fewer than 800 reached Leh. 4 destroyers were sunk: Shirayuki, Asagumo, Tokitsukaze, and Arashio. Allied losses: 5 aircraft shot down, 13 aircrew killed. It was the most one-sided victory of the Pacific War to that point. It was also the last time the Japanese attempted a major troop convoy to New Guinea by daylight. Here is how it unfolded in order. On February 28, 1943, Vice Admiral Mikawa ordered Operation 81 to begin, relying on a weather forecast that was correct in every detail except its duration. On March 1st, the convoy sailed under cloud cover, undetected. On March 2nd, the weather held, and the convoy remained hidden. On March 3rd, the weather cleared 28 hours earlier than predicted. At 0815 hours, a single B-24 reconnaissance aircraft spotted the convoy and radioed its position. At 1120 hours, 13 B-17 bombers attacked from high altitude, scattering the formation and damaging 3 transports. At 1145 hours, 13 B-25 skip bombers attacked at mast height, sinking 4 transports and 1 destroyer in 11 minutes. On March 4th, the 4 remaining transports were found and sunk in 30 minutes. From 1100 to 1240 hours, Allied fighters strafed survivors in the water. By evening, 8 transports and 4 destroyers were gone. It took 8 hours to compile every name and confirm every number, but the record is complete. The 8 transports sunk were Kyokusei Maru, 6,400 tons, Teiyo Maru, 6,800 tons, Ayo Maru, 5,400 tons, Taime Maru, 2,800 tons, Shinai Maru, 5,600 tons, Nojima Maru, 4,700 tons, Kembu Maru, 950 tons, and Oigawa Maru, 6,500 tons. Total tonnage, 39,150 tons. The destroyers sunk were Shirayuki, Asagumo, Tokitsukaze, and Arashio. The operation cost Japan 39,150 tons of irreplaceable merchant shipping, 4 destroyers it could not afford to lose, and 2,900 soldiers of the 51st Division who never reached the battlefield they were sent to reinforce. If you found those numbers useful, consider subscribing. Every script on this channel involves cross-referencing operational logs, after-action reports, and survivor accounts to reconstruct exactly what happened, in order, with names and numbers intact. This one pulled from 18 sources, including the 5th Air Force War Diary, the Japanese 51st Division records, and post-war interrogation reports from Admiral Kimawa. The next video will cover why the Japanese submarine force failed at Guadalcanal despite having better torpedoes and better submarines than the Americans at the start of the war. It's not the story the histories tell. If you want to see it, turn on notifications. 4 factors decided the Battle of the Bismarck Sea. First, meteorology. Lieutenant Tanaka's forecast was accurate, but weather systems do not follow schedules. The front cleared on the morning of March 3rd, instead of the afternoon of March 4th. That 28-hour error exposed the convoy to Allied air attack for an additional day, during which every transport was sunk. Had the weather held as predicted, the convoy would have reached Leh on the morning of March 3rd, before the first Allied aircraft arrived. Second, innovation. Lieutenant Colonel Paul Gunn's skip bombing technique transformed the B-25 Mitchell from a medium bomber unsuited for anti-ship work into the most effective ship killer in the Pacific theater. The technique required no new technology, no new aircraft, and no new bombs. Only 4-second delayed fuses, 8 machine guns mounted in the nose, and crews willing to fly at 50 feet directly toward a warship. 18 crews trained for 6 weeks. 13 attacked on March 3rd. They sank 4 transports and 1 destroyer in 11 minutes and lost 1 aircraft. The hit rate was above 50%. That was 25 times the hit rate achieved by high-altitude bombing in 1942. Third, intelligence. The convoy was detected within 3 hours of leaving the cloud cover, not because of code breaking, the Japanese had changed their naval codes after Midway, but because General Kenney had positioned reconnaissance aircraft on a grid pattern, covering every likely route from Rabaul to New Guinea. Lieutenant McElhatton's B-24 was one of 14 reconnaissance flights that day. He happened to be in the right sector at the right time, but it was not luck. Kenney had ensured that no convoy could cross the Bismarck Sea undetected as long as the weather was clear. Fourth, doctrine. Admiral Kimura's decision to divide his destroyers, 4 to escort the damaged transports toward Leh, 4 to rescue survivors, followed Japanese naval doctrine, which emphasized rescuing personnel over mission completion. The doctrine was humane. It was also, in this case, fatal. The 4 transports proceeding toward Leh were slow, damaged, and inadequately escorted. They were sunk within 30 minutes the next morning. Had Kimura ordered all 8 destroyers to escort the transports, or to abandon the transports entirely and retreat at flank speed, losses would have been lower. Doctrine, not cowardice, dictated his choice. The outcome was the same. But there is a single reversal worth stating plainly. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea was not an American victory over Japanese incompetence. Vice Admiral Mikawa's decision to proceed was not reckless. His weather forecast was sound. His timing was correct. His assumption that the convoy could cross the Bismarck Sea under cloud cover was based on the same assumption that had protected Japanese convoys for the previous 14 months. It had worked every time. On March 3rd, it failed because the weather cleared 28 hours too soon, and the Americans had developed a new bombing technique that no one in Rabaul knew existed. Mikawa had planned against the threat he knew. He could not plan against the one he didn't. And there is a second reversal, folded inside the first. The skip bombing technique that decided the battle almost did not exist. General Kenney had approved Gunn's experiments in November 1942, but the 5th Air Force's operational staff resisted the idea for 3 months. Their objection was not technical but procedural. Skip bombing required B-25 crews to fly at 50 feet, within range of light anti-aircraft fire, instead of at 10,000 feet where they were relatively safe. Crew losses, the staff predicted, would be unacceptable. Kenney overruled them in January 1943 and authorized 18 crews to train. On March 3rd, those crews sank 4 transports, lost 1 aircraft, and validated a technique that would sink 70 Japanese vessels by the end of 1943. Doctrine had nearly prevented the innovation that won the battle. After the battle, the Japanese Navy revised its convoy doctrine. All future troop movements to New Guinea would occur at night, in smaller groups, using fast destroyers converted to troop transports instead of slow merchant vessels. The Tokyo Express runs that had supplied Guadalcanal were now extended to New Guinea. The new doctrine reduced capacity. A destroyer could carry 200 troops, a transport could carry 2,000, but it reduced losses. No Japanese convoy of comparable size attempted a daylight crossing of the Bismarck Sea for the remainder of the war. For the Americans, the battle validated air power as a counter to naval surface forces. General Kenney's after-action report, submitted to General Douglas MacArthur on March 8, 1943, concluded, "Control of the sea in this theater no longer requires control of the surface. Aircraft can deny the enemy use of sea lanes as effectively as submarines or surface vessels, at lower cost and with greater speed." MacArthur forwarded the report to Washington with his endorsement. The conclusion shaped Allied strategy in the Pacific for the next 2 years. Lieutenant Colonel Paul Gunn received the Distinguished Service Cross for developing the skip bombing technique. He was promoted to colonel in April 1943 and assigned to continue developing air-to-ship tactics for the 5th Air Force. He survived the war. Major Edward Larner, who led the first combat skip bombing attack, received the Silver Star and was promoted to lieutenant colonel. He was killed in action over Wewak, New Guinea, on August 17, 1943, when his B-25 was shot down during a low-level strafing run. He was 26 years old. Squadron leader John Jackson, who led the strafing attacks on survivors in the water, resigned his commission in the Royal Australian Air Force in 1946. In his resignation letter he wrote, "I followed lawful orders. I do not dispute that the orders were militarily justified, but I will not serve in a military that asks me to do that again." He returned to civilian life in Sydney and never spoke publicly about the battle. He died in 1979. In 2018, marine archaeologist Kevin Denley, leading a survey expedition funded by Paul Allen's Vulcan Inc., located the wreck of Io Maru in 900 feet of water, 35 miles northeast of Lae. The ship rests upright, her bow cleanly severed by the skip bomb that sank her. Denley's team did not enter the wreck. It is a war grave. Inside are the remains of approximately 400 soldiers of the 51st Division who were trapped below deck when the ship went down. They are still there. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea lasted 3 days, involved 8 transports, 8 destroyers, and approximately 200 Allied aircraft, and resulted in the deaths of 2,900 Japanese soldiers and sailors. It was not the largest battle of the Pacific War, not the most strategically decisive, and not the most famous, but it was the first battle in which Allied air power alone destroyed an entire enemy naval convoy without surface ships or submarines, and the first battle in which skip bombing was used to decisive effect. Those 2 facts changed the war. That is why the battle matters. That is why we remember it. And that is how America won its war in the Pacific. Not with a single decisive blow, but with 100 innovations, like this one. Each tested under fire, each paid for in blood, each irreplaceable. Subscribe to this channel if you want to see how the other 99 innovations worked. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. Tell us in the comments where you are watching from. We will see you in the next one.